The morning I decided to plant those seeds, the mist was still hanging low over the fields like a shroud of doubt. I stood at the edge of my property, holding the small bag of what my neighbors would soon call fool's gold. The agricultural supply store had almost laughed me out when I asked for them. "Nobody plants those around here," the clerk had said, shaking his head. "There's a reason for that." But something deep in my gut told me this was different. I'd spent months researching, reading agricultural journals until my eyes burned, studying soil composition reports and analyzing weather patterns. The data was all there, screaming at me that conventional wisdom was wrong. These seeds, a heritage variety that had been forgotten for decades, were perfectly suited for our microclimate. My neighbors thought I'd lost my mind. At the monthly farmers' meeting, when I mentioned my plans, the room went silent, except for muffled chuckles. Old Pete Morrison, who'd been farming longer than I'd been alive, just shook his head slowly. "Son, some lessons you got to learn the hard way," he'd said, not unkindly, but with the certainty of someone who'd seen too many young farmers fail chasing dreams instead of dollars. The seeds felt heavy in my palm as I made my choice. This wasn't just about farming anymore. It was about proving that innovation could triumph over tradition, that careful research could beat inherited wisdom. I had my doubts, sure, but I also had my convictions. As I walked back to the farmhouse that morning, I didn't know I was about to embark on the most challenging and ultimately rewarding season of my life. The decision was made. There was no turning back now. The planting began before dawn on a Tuesday that felt like destiny calling. I'd prepared the soil differently than anyone in the county, deeper furrows, specialized organic amendments, and an irrigation system I'd designed myself after studying drought-resistant farming techniques from 3 different continents. The neighbors who bothered to look over the fence just shook their heads and went back to their own conventional planting. My hands were steady as I loaded the seed drill, but my heart was racing. Each seed that went into the ground represented not just a potential plant, but a piece of my reputation, my future, and my family's legacy. I'd mortgaged everything for this gamble, the tractor payments, the new irrigation system, even took out a loan against next year's projected income. My wife Sarah had stood by me through it all, though I caught her staring out the kitchen window some mornings, worry etched across her face like furrows in a field. The seeds themselves were beautiful in their simplicity, smaller than what everyone else was planting, darker, with an almost metallic sheen. The Agricultural Extension Office had no data on them for our region. "You're flying blind," the county agent had warned me. "These haven't been grown commercially here in over 50 years. There's no precedent, no success stories, no safety net." But that's exactly why I believed they'd work. The climate had changed since those varieties were last grown here. The soil had evolved. The old farmers who dismissed these seeds were thinking with yesterday's conditions, not tomorrow's possibilities. I spent 3 exhausting days planting, working from sunrise to sunset, fueled by coffee and conviction. By the time I finished, every muscle in my body ached, but I'd never felt more alive. The field looked ordinary from the road, just another patch of freshly planted earth. But I knew better. I'd just planted a revolution. The weeks that followed planting were the longest of my life. While my neighbors' conventional crops sprouted predictably, my field remained bare longer than anyone expected. "Told you so," became the unofficial greeting whenever I went to town. The hardware store clerk would just nod knowingly when I came in for supplies. At church, people would pat my shoulder with that particular kind of pity reserved for well-meaning fools. Sarah never said, "I told you so," but I could see the worry lines deepening around her eyes. Our savings account was getting thin, and the monthly bills kept coming regardless of what was or wasn't growing in our field. Some nights, I'd walk out to the dark field with a flashlight, kneeling to examine the soil for any sign of life, any hint that my gamble wasn't the colossal mistake everyone thought it was. The breakthrough came on a Thursday morning 3 weeks after everyone else's crops had sprouted. I was checking the field in that early light that makes everything look possible, and there it was. The first green shoot pushing through the soil. Not one, Not 10, but hundreds, scattered across the field like tiny soldiers emerging from underground bunkers. My heart nearly stopped. I called Sarah out, and we stood there in our pajamas and boots, holding hands and staring at proof that sometimes faith gets rewarded. But even then, the skepticism continued. "Sure, they sprouted," old Pete Morrison said when I mentioned it at the feed store. "But sprouting ain't harvesting. These fancy seeds of yours might grow pretty, but what matters is bushels per acre come October." He wasn't wrong to be cautious. I'd seen plenty of crops look promising early on, only to fail when it mattered most. Still, something was different about these plants. Even as young shoots, they seemed more robust, their leaves a deeper green, their stems thicker than what I was used to seeing. I began to allow myself to hope. By late June, my field had transformed into something that stopped traffic on the county road. The plants were growing faster and fuller than anyone had predicted, including me. What started as tentative green shoots had become a lush, dense crop that stood nearly a foot taller than the conventional varieties in neighboring fields. The leaves were broader, the color deeper, and the overall health of the crop was undeniable, even to the most stubborn skeptics. The turning point came when Dr. Jennifer Martinez from the State Agricultural College drove out to see what all the fuss was about. She'd heard rumors about my experimental crop and wanted to conduct some informal soil and plant tissue tests. I'll never forget watching her walk through my field, taking notes, collecting samples, her expression growing more intrigued with each measurement. "The root system is remarkable," she told me after spending 2 hours in the field. "These plants are accessing nutrients and water from depths that conventional varieties can't reach. Your soil structure is actually improving because of how these roots are breaking up hardpan layers." She paused, looking across the field. "I've never seen anything quite like this." Word spread quickly after Dr. Martinez's visit. Suddenly, the same neighbors who'd been shaking their heads in disapproval were finding excuses to drive by my property. Some stopped to ask questions, though they tried to make it seem casual. "Just curious what you're growing over there," they'd say, as if they hadn't been discussing it over coffee for months. The plants continued to defy expectations. While other farms dealt with the usual summer stresses, heat damage, pest pressure, nutrient deficiencies, my crop seemed to thrive. The heritage genetics I'd chosen were proving their worth, showing resilience that generations of selective breeding for yield had bred out of modern varieties. I was beginning to understand that I hadn't just chosen different seeds, I'd chosen a different philosophy of farming entirely. The storm hit on July 15th, with the fury of nature unleashed. I woke to lightning splitting the sky and rain hammering the roof like bullets. By morning, the county had received 6 inches of rain in 4 hours, with winds gusting to 70 miles per hour. It was the kind of weather that could destroy a season's work in a single night. As soon as it was safe, I drove out to survey the damage, my stomach churning with dread. The conventional corn in neighboring fields was flattened, stalks broken and twisted like broken bones scattered across muddy ground. Soybeans were waterlogged and beginning to show signs of root rot. The local radio was already reporting massive crop losses across the region. But my field was different, incredibly, impossibly different. The heritage variety plants were still standing. Not just surviving, but actually looking healthier than before the storm. Their deep root systems had anchored them against the wind, while their robust stalks had bent without breaking. The excess water that was drowning conventional crops was being efficiently processed by root systems designed for exactly these conditions. Old Pete Morrison was the first neighbor to stop by that morning. He stood at the edge of my field for a long time, not saying a word, just staring at plants that defied everything he thought he knew about farming. Finally, he turned to me and said, "Son, I owe you an apology. And maybe I need to start asking some questions instead of assuming I got all the answers." The storm had done more than spare my crop. It had provided undeniable proof that innovation could triumph over tradition. Insurance adjusters spent the next week documenting crop losses throughout the county, but they barely needed to glance at my field. While my neighbors filed claims and calculated losses, I was calculating what was shaping up to be the largest harvest our county had seen in decades. The whispers of "lucky fool" were beginning to change to murmurs of "maybe he knew something we didn't." By August, my farm had become an unofficial research site. Dr. Martinez returned with a full team from the Agricultural College, bringing soil augers, plant tissue analysis kits, and measuring equipment I couldn't even name. They set up monitoring stations throughout my field, taking readings on everything from photosynthetic rates to soil microbiology. The data they were collecting painted a picture that challenged decades of conventional agricultural wisdom. "These plants are processing nitrogen more efficiently than anything we've documented in this region," Dr. Martinez explained as she showed me preliminary results. "They're also demonstrating remarkable drought tolerance even in conditions of adequate moisture, which suggests they could maintain productivity even in stress conditions that would devastate conventional varieties." The research team wasn't the only group paying attention. Agricultural reporters from 3 states away started calling, wanting to document what they were calling the heritage experiment. A photographer from Farm Journal magazine spent 2 days capturing images of my crop against the backdrop of my neighbor's struggling conventional fields. The contrast was becoming impossible to ignore. While other farms dealt with the typical late summer stress, yellowing leaves, stunted growth, early signs of pest damage, my plants maintained their deep green color and continued their robust growth. The seed heads were forming larger and denser than anything I'd seen before, heavy with promise. But the real validation came from an unexpected source. 3 different seed companies sent representatives to my farm, asking if I'd be willing to license the variety for broader production. "We're seeing yield potential that could revolutionize grain production in this entire region," one rep told me. "What you've done here isn't just successful farming, it's agricultural evolution." I turned them all down. This wasn't about profit anymore. It was about proving that sometimes the old ways, combined with new understanding, could create something extraordinary. Besides, I wanted to see the harvest results before making any decisions about the future. September brought the kind of anticipation that makes your skin tingle. As harvest approached, my field looked like something from an agricultural textbook's chapter on optimal crop conditions. The plants stood uniformly tall and strong, their seed heads heavy and golden, rustling in the breeze with the sound of prosperity. Every morning, I'd walk the field checking moisture levels and calculating optimal harvest timing. The combine harvester I'd reserved was the same model every farmer in the county used, but I'd made modifications based on research about harvesting heritage grains, adjusted concave settings, modified sieves, and recalibrated fan speeds, all designed to maximize yield while minimizing seed damage. The equipment dealer thought I was overthinking things, but after months of being told I was wrong about everything, I'd learned to trust my research over conventional opinions. My neighbors were preparing for harvest too, but their conversations at the grain elevator and feed store carried a tone of resignation rather than excitement. The storm damage, combined with a challenging growing season, meant most farmers were hoping to break even rather than turn a profit. Some were already talking about crop insurance claims and next year's strategies. But word about my field's performance had spread throughout the county. Other farmers started stopping by, sometimes bringing their wives or grown children, ostensibly to see how the experiment turned out. They'd walk along the field's edge, comparing my plants to their own crops, asking careful questions about techniques and timing. The skepticism was gradually being replaced by curiosity and, in some cases, a grudging respect. Sarah had started fielding calls from agricultural publications and university extension offices. Everyone wanted to document the harvest, to quantify what everyone could see, but few could believe. We'd gone from being the local laughingstock to becoming the center of attention for all the right reasons. The countdown to harvest had begun, and for the first time since I'd planted those controversial seeds, I allowed myself to truly believe that I was about to prove everyone wrong in the most spectacular way possible. October 12th dawned clear and crisp, with just enough wind to dry the morning dew but not enough to interfere with harvesting. It was perfect combining weather, and I'd been waiting for this day for 7 months. The combine was fueled and calibrated, the grain truck was positioned, and a small crowd of neighbors, reporters, and agricultural researchers had gathered to witness what everyone suspected would be either vindication or humiliation on a very public scale. I climbed into the combine cab with hands that were steadier than I'd expected. All the worry, all the doubt, all the sleepless nights wondering if I'd made a catastrophic mistake. It all came down to the next few hours. As I engaged the header and began the first pass through the field, the sound of grain hitting the bin was music unlike anything I'd ever heard. The yield monitor on the combine dashboard started displaying numbers that made me blink and look again. Then again. The digital readout showed bushels per acre that were not just good, they were extraordinary. By the end of the first hour, I was harvesting yields that exceeded the county average by 40%. By the end of the second hour, it was 60% above average. Dr. Martinez was taking real-time measurements, calling out numbers to her research team. "This is unprecedented," she announced to the gathered crowd. "These yield figures aren't just exceptional for heritage varieties. They're exceptional, period. This field is producing more grain per acre than anything we've documented in this region." Old Pete Morrison stood by the grain truck as I unloaded the first hopper, watching golden grain cascade down like a waterfall of vindication. He shook his head slowly, not in disapproval this time, but in amazement. 43 years of farming," he said to no one in particular, "and I ain't never seen anything like this." By the end of that first day, the numbers were undeniable. I had not only succeeded, I had succeeded beyond anyone's wildest projections. The final harvest numbers took 3 days to fully calculate and verify, but when they were done, the results sent shockwaves through the agricultural community that extended far beyond our small county. My heritage variety had produced 127 bushels per acre, in a year when the county average was 78 bushels per acre. I hadn't just exceeded expectations. I had shattered every record in the region's agricultural history. The grain elevator manager, a man who'd been skeptical from the beginning, stood staring at the certified weight tickets like he was reading hieroglyphics. "In 30 years of buying grain, I've never seen individual yields like this," he admitted. And the quality, protein levels, test weights, moisture content, it's all premium grade. This isn't just quantity, it's quality that commands top dollar. The economic impact was staggering. While my neighbors were struggling to break even on their conventional crops, I was looking at profit margins that would allow me to pay off the farm, invest in infrastructure, and still have enough left over to expand operations. The bank president, who'd been nervously watching my unconventional loan applications all year, called personally to congratulate me and discuss future partnership opportunities. But the validation went beyond dollars and bushels. Agricultural universities from 4 states requested permission to study my field over the winter, trying to understand the soil biology changes that had contributed to such exceptional performance. Seed companies were no longer just interested in licensing my variety. They were offering research partnerships and asking me to consult on heritage crop development programs. The local newspaper ran a front-page story with the headline, "Local Farmers Gamble Pays Off Big." The article featured a photo of me standing next to grain trucks loaded with my harvest. But what struck me most was the quote they used from old Pete Morrison. "Sometimes the young teach the old, and sometimes the old ways are the new ways." This young man didn't just grow a crop, he grew a new understanding of what's possible. The success of my harvest created a ripple effect throughout the farming community that extended far beyond our county borders. Within weeks of the final numbers being published, I was fielding calls from farmers across 3 states, all wanting to know about seed sources, planting techniques, and soil management practices. The same agricultural extension office that had warned me about flying blind was now asking me to speak at their winter education seminars. The most meaningful conversations, though, were happening right in my own community. Neighbors who had mocked my seed choice were now stopping by with notebooks, asking detailed questions about everything from soil preparation to harvest timing. Old Pete Morrison became a regular visitor, bringing different farmers each time, all eager to understand how heritage genetics could be integrated into modern farming operations. I've been farming with my grandfather's stubbornness and my father's fear of change, Pete told me one afternoon as we walked through my harvested field. But watching what you've accomplished here, I'm realizing that maybe the biggest risk is not taking any risks at all. Maybe innovation isn't about abandoning everything we know. Maybe it's about combining what we know with what we're willing to learn. Sarah and I started hosting monthly heritage crop study groups in our barn, sharing research, discussing techniques, and planning cooperative experiments for the next growing season. What started as a defense of unconventional choices had evolved into a movement toward sustainable, high-yield agriculture that honored both innovation and tradition. The local seed dealer, who had initially laughed at my unusual order, contacted specialty seed companies and began stocking heritage varieties for the first time in decades. "Customer demand," he explained with a sheepish grin. "Turns out there's more interest in these old varieties than I thought." By winter, 7 farmers in our county had committed to planting heritage varieties the following spring, and agricultural researchers were designing formal trials to replicate and expand on my results. What began as one farmer's gamble was becoming a regional agricultural evolution. By November, the story of my harvest had spread far beyond local farming circles. Agricultural magazines from across the country featured articles about what they called the Heritage Revolution, and I found myself invited to speak at farming conferences from Iowa to Georgia. The boy who had been mocked for his seed choices was now being asked to share his insights with some of the most respected farmers in the nation. The speaking engagements were surreal experiences. Standing before audiences of hundreds of farmers, agricultural scientists, and industry professionals, sharing the story of how doubt had transformed into vindication. But more than telling my story, I was learning from theirs. Farmers from different climates and soil types were adapting my techniques to their conditions, creating variations and innovations that pushed the boundaries even further. Dr. Martinez published the first peer-reviewed paper based on her research in my field, and the conclusions were striking. The heritage variety hadn't just outperformed conventional crops in yield. It had actively improved soil health, increased carbon sequestration, and demonstrated remarkable resilience to weather extremes. This represents a fundamental shift in how we think about agricultural productivity, she wrote. The integration of heritage genetics with modern farming methods offers a pathway to sustainable intensification that could transform crop production. The economic ripples were equally impressive. The grain elevator started offering premium prices for heritage varieties, creating economic incentives for other farmers to make the switch. A local processing facility announced plans to develop specialty flour products from heritage grains, creating additional market opportunities for farmers willing to embrace the change. But perhaps most satisfying was the personal transformation happening in my own community. The farmer who had been dismissed as a dreamer was now being sought out for advice. The agricultural practices I'd developed through research and intuition were being refined and improved through collaboration with neighbors who had become partners in innovation rather than observers of failure. The success had exceeded every expectation, but it had also created new responsibilities and opportunities that I was still learning to navigate. Winter brought time for reflection and planning, but also an unexpected challenge: managing success. The phone calls from researchers, reporters, and agricultural companies had become overwhelming. Everyone wanted a piece of the story, the methods, or the results. What had started as a personal journey of agricultural innovation was rapidly becoming a public phenomenon that required careful navigation. Sarah and I spent countless evenings discussing how to handle the attention while staying true to our original goals. We weren't interested in becoming agricultural celebrities or building a business empire around our success. We were farmers who had discovered something important, and we wanted that discovery to benefit the broader farming community rather than just enrich ourselves. We decided to establish the Heritage Crop Research Cooperative, a non-profit organization dedicated to supporting farmers interested in experimenting with sustainable, high-yield agricultural practices. Instead of licensing our techniques to large corporations, we would share information freely while supporting research and education initiatives. The cooperative would provide seeds, technical support, and marketing assistance to farmers willing to embrace innovative approaches to traditional farming. The planning for the next growing season was equally exciting and daunting. I had committed to expanding my heritage crop acreage, but also to serving as a demonstration farm for the Agricultural College's formal research trials. My farm would host variety trials, soil health studies, and economic analyses that would provide the scientific foundation for broader adoption of heritage crop systems. 7 local farmers had committed to planting heritage varieties, and we were coordinating our efforts to maximize learning opportunities. Different farms would try different varieties, compare various soil management techniques, and share results through monthly meetings and seasonal field days. What had started as one farmer's experiment was becoming a community-wide commitment to agricultural innovation. The winter months were filled with seed ordering, equipment preparation, and educational planning, but also with a deep sense of satisfaction that came from knowing we were building something larger than any individual success. Spring planting arrived with a completely different energy than the previous year. Instead of facing skepticism and doubt, I was working alongside neighbors who had become collaborators in a shared vision of agricultural innovation. The Heritage Crop Research Cooperative had grown to include 15 farmers across 3 counties, all committed to proving that sustainable intensification wasn't just possible, it was profitable. The media attention continued, but it felt different now. Rather than being the lone voice defending an unconventional choice, I was part of a movement that was demonstrating practical solutions to agricultural challenges. The success stories were multiplying, creating momentum that extended far beyond any individual farm or season. Old Pete Morrison planted his first heritage variety test plot that spring, choosing the same seeds that I had planted the year before. "If these old seeds are good enough to make you the most successful farmer in the county," he said with a grin, "then maybe they're good enough for this old farmer too." Watching him plant those seeds felt like completing a circle that had begun with mockery and doubt, but had evolved into mutual respect and shared purpose. The second year's results were even more impressive than the first. Not only did my yields remain exceptional, but the farmers who had joined the cooperative were seeing remarkable success as well. The heritage varieties were proving their value across different soil types, management styles, and weather conditions. What had once seemed like a risky gamble was now demonstrating the reliability that comes from genetic diversity and ecological resilience. Dr. Martinez's expanded research program was documenting improvements in soil health, water retention, and carbon sequestration that suggested the benefits extended far beyond yield and profit. "You've started something that could change how we think about agriculture's role in environmental stewardship," she told me. "This isn't just about growing more food, it's about growing food in ways that heal the land." As I stood in my field that second fall, watching the combine harvest another exceptional crop, I reflected on the journey from ridicule to respect, from isolation to community, from doubt to certainty. The seeds I had planted weren't just heritage varieties. They were seeds of change that had grown into something much larger than I had ever imagined. The story that began with mockery had become a testament to the power of research, persistence, and the courage to challenge conventional wisdom. Most importantly, it had become a story shared by an entire community of farmers who had learned that sometimes the greatest innovations come from reconnecting with forgotten wisdom. Thank you so much for listening to this incredible journey from doubt to triumph. The power of believing in innovation, even when everyone else doubts you, can truly transform not just your own life, but entire communities. I'd love to hear from you in the comments below. Please let me know what part of the world you're listening from, and if you've ever taken a leap of faith that others questioned but ultimately proved successful. Your stories inspire others to take their own bold steps toward their dreams. If you enjoyed this story and want to hear more tales of perseverance, innovation, and triumph against the odds, please subscribe to the channel and hit that notification bell. Your support helps us continue sharing these inspiring real-life stories that prove anything is possible when you combine knowledge, courage, and determination. Until next time, Keep believing in your dreams and never let anyone convince you that innovation and tradition can't work hand in hand to create something extraordinary.